In this section we are going to take a look at line jitter. Line jitter is that uneven drawing around the edge of a cartoon, the very human looking uneven line that is, well, it's quite trendy, and we can produce it in Lightwave. Now it can be produced very simply by simply applying a moving displacement map. And there are a number of ways of doing it, and this, although it's pretty simple to implement, it takes a long time to dial in the exact values that you want. The first thing we're going to do is add displacement. So I have my cow object here. This is actually a modified cow object. I took it into Modeler, turned on tab, and saved it as a subdivision surface object. The reason I did that is because I wanted more geometry to displace. Now this cow rendered out, I spent some time in getting a fairly nice looking hand-drawn look to it. You'll recognize we've got some of the texture shading going on. We have the gradient shading. We also have the cell look edges pretty nicely adjusted so it all comes out. This did take a fair amount of time, but that's what I do when I'm alone in my room. So what we're going to do is add some displacement to this cow. And I'm going to go right onto the displacement map under Object Properties with the cow selected. Click on Displacement Map. I already have one built in here. My scale appears to be half a meter. Texture value 0.0015, which is quite low. I have it turned off for now. And I turn it on, and we can see the effects that it has on the cow. Turn it off. It moves it that much. Now the tricky part is to have it move. Now we can set up keyframes. What I have discovered is sometimes to add even more randomness to this, I go into my envelope editor. This is my X position. What I have done is I've added the noisy channel. Scale of 2, speed of 10. Once again, those values were discovered through purely trial and error and what looked best. Now it's moving back and forth on the X, which means most of the displacement will seem to be on the sides, especially when it's moving, which is kind of what we want. I've also done it on the Y and on the Z. It, at this point, is purely a matter of taste. Now what happens, if you've never used Noisy Channel before, you simply select Noisy Channel. By double-clicking on it, it brings up the values. And as you can see in here, the red line, that's our constant value. Turning on Noisy Channel is jumping all over the place. I can increase that or decrease it, make it move faster or slower. This happened to be a setting that I found worked well for the purposes that I wanted here. Now as we scrub, we can see how the cow is being displaced. That fractal noise texture is being moved around by the noisy channel. In every scene, it's moving a little bit. So let's render one of these frames as it is. Without motion blur, because that's the next step. This is our image without the displacement. Everything is very cow-like, as it should be. This is our image with the displacement. Very uneven, and it just looks a little bit distorted. It's not really that much of an advantage. But there is a trick here. I'm going into my camera, properties, I turn on my motion blur. I'm going to render one out quickly here so you can see the effects that this has, and then we're going to discuss a little bit about how motion blur works. Now, when this is moving, okay, see the lines in here? This is the motion blur of the displacement. The displacement is happening in between frames, and we set our anti-aliasing to low, which is 5 steps. And let's see if we can actually spot all 5 steps in here. Not quite, but close. Each pass of the anti-aliasing is 1/5 of the way to the next frame. And that displacement is moving constantly. So what we get here is each one of those individually rendered frames. And they all average out to what the original picture would be, which would be this one here. And there it is with some distortion. And it gets better, of course, when you add, I'm going to go to Enhance Medium, and we're also going to do Dithered. Now, dithered is like is basically doubling the amount of passes of anti-aliasing. Now we went from 5 passes at low. We're now at 9 passes for medium, but actually it is more like 18 passes because it's doing an A pass and a B pass. As you've probably guessed by now, it's going to average out to a more even. The average is going to look closer to the original non-displaced rendering. However, those fuzzy areas are going to be much smoother. And the advantage is it's looking almost chalk-like. It's looking very organic, very hand-drawn. Now this is an excellent technique to use on the ×2 or ×3 with the frame doubling. And it also, you do need a fair amount of geometry for this to work, and be sure to budget a good amount of time to experiment with the different settings. But once you have it dialed in, once you have the right amount of displacement, the right amount of motion blur, you can get some very pleasing results. And it seems to work best on organic models, which kind of makes sense. Of course, the hand-drawn look does not like the straight lines. Here we're taking another pass on a different frame, and because of the random motion, different parts will be affected slightly differently. And if we wanted to add even more variation, right now the displacement is only moving up and down the X. An interesting thing about the motion, noisy channel, if I add another keyframe here and set that value to say 1, and let's see, offset repeat, and it just keeps going. But what's fun is that it keeps on moving down the Z even though it's being jittered by the noisy, because the noisy just adds to the motion that's already there. Now this will ensure that things are constantly changing, because previously the noisy channel was just it was starting at 0, going up from 0 a little bit, going down from 0, but pretty much sticking right around that 0 point, so you would have some sameness on the frames. By giving it an offset and having it move constantly, that means things will constantly be changing through it, but there's not enough motion that you will probably not see the motion down the X. And if you do, you can always add a little bit of Z motion to that, so it's also moving down the Z as it's being noisy down the X. Once again, you just got to keep trying. Try a whole bunch of different ways, and you can see that we've lost a lot of that harshness of the cell look edges around the edge. It looks like we have some shading going on. A very natural look. Good technique, fun to play with.